For this podcast, I'm reviewing the book titled The Year of the Rat, authored by Edward Timberlake and William Triplett. In terms of their assessment, there are four lines of activities that the Chinese Communist Party has pursued. Firstly, they have used arms dealers with established links to the Communist Party and have sought to transfer weapons of mass destruction and the means to produce them to terrorist nations in the Middle East. Secondly, they sought to suppress the Chinese people's desire for democracy and basic human rights. Thirdly, they have pursued a strategy of intimidation against its pro-democracy neighbors who were aligned with the United States. And fourthly, they sought to modernize their military's capabilities to keep up with the competition. For China to accomplish this, they established two major goals, which was to obtain political and economic intelligence, which can be boiled down to information gathering. Under the Clinton administration, China would achieve these two goals, and there is ample evidence that supports the fact that they were willful in enabling China to infiltrate and gain a competitive advantage. Many of the aides to the White House would attempt to claim these failures on their part as being mere oversights so they could lay out the argument that they lacked knowledge and intent to avoid criminal prosecution. However, proving the corruption and criminal intent on the part of Bill Clinton would be difficult since there would be a number of impediments to the investigation. Such impediments consist of the fact that the two key players, by the names of Ron Brown and Charles Meisner, would die in a plane crash. 18 of the participants in the Chinese infiltration would flee the country, and a total of 79 people would decide to take the Fifth Amendment. Some of the participants to the corruption would claim memory loss or stonewall the investigation by claiming national security as a means of concealing evidence. The infiltration all starts out with the Riyadi family, who are ethnically Chinese, but would migrate to Indonesia and have been proven to have had ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Through the Leipel Group, owned by Mokhtar Riyadi, they would try to buy the National Bank of Georgia with the assistance of an investment bank by the name of Jackson Stevens, which is based out of Little Rock, Arkansas. At the same time in the 1970s, political operatives were also trying to broker the sale of the National Bank of Georgia to Saudi nationals who had links to Saudi intelligence and were assisting the CIA with drug running and the financial means to back the Contras in Nicaragua. Also of notable interest is the fact that Arkansas was ground zero for funneling drugs from South America at one point in time. So while China and Mokhtar Riyadi are trying to make inroads into politics and banking, we also have Saudi Arabia and its loyalists doing the same. It should also be noted that while China's agents have sought to use Indonesia as a cover for its true aspirations to fund businesses that would support the CCP's goals, Indonesia would also be a country of interest to the Muslim Brotherhood, which was supported by Saudi Arabian royals who were once in bed with the CIA. It is also noteworthy that the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank Corp, which has Chinese origins, better known as HSBC, was also heavily involved in money laundering of drug proceeds for the CIA. Through Jackson Stevens, Mokhtar Riyadi would end up meeting Bill Clinton, who was a rising political star for his role in enabling the flow of drugs into Arkansas at the behest of the CIA. In 1984, Mokhtar Riady and Jackson Stevens had partial ownership of Worthen Bank, and James Riady would get placed in position at the bank as chief operating officer. Because the bank was managing the Arkansas State Pension Fund and Worthen Bank had taken losses in an investment scheme under the tutelage of Stevens and Riady, Stevens would have to write a check for $32 million to cover the losses that Arkansas would have endured and caused Bill Clinton embarrassment. There would also be instances of the Worthen Bank making sweetheart loans to Riady-controlled companies and associates, which caught the attention of regulators. In 1992, as Bill Clinton's political campaign was struggling, James Riady would influence Worthen Bank to extend a line of credit to Bill Clinton's campaign. Aside from this line of credit to Bill Clinton, James Riady would also hire Clinton associates like Webb Hubbell, Joseph Groyer, Mark Robmeyer, and White House aide Mark Middleton. In the 1980s, the Riady family would buy a Los Angeles bank by the named the Bank of Trade. With this new venture, the Riadys would bring in their own loyalists to work for their enterprises in America, and this loyalist's name was John Huang, and he was a native Chinese person who was born in Taiwan but had loyalties to the CCP. This bank they had bought would later become the Lipo Bank. In April of 1988, John Huang would organize a dinner and fundraiser with a Democratic activist by the name of Maria Tsai, who would also assist with the event, and she would raise $110,000. For whatever reason, Maria never disclosed the names of actual sources who made the donations, so that was always a subject of suspicion around her. After the donations were made, James Riady would direct Maria to put pressure on senators to change their stance on policy issues pertaining to Taiwan, where James had wanted to open a Lipo Bank branch, perhaps as a cover to conduct spying in Taiwan. In mid-August of 1992, Bill Clinton and James Riady would take a limousine ride to discuss business, and shortly after their limo ride, $600,000 would be contributed to the DNC, and this money would prove to be crucial in Bill Clinton's election. He would actually win key states such as Georgia and Ohio, which were crucial for his victory. For the 1993 inauguration, James Riady and John Huang would each give $100,000 to receive party favors from the Clinton administration. In 1993, a friend of Bill's by the name of Joe Groyer made a $200,000 contribution to the DNC on behalf of Lipo Group, which he was a partner in. With the hundreds of thousands, this would get Riadys and their associates access to the White House, keeping in mind that their associates were loyalists to the CCP. John Huang would also act as liaison to Mr. Chang, who was a CCP Politburo member, ranking 8th in the hierarchy, and he was also mayor of Beijing. At the time, there was coordination of a trip to Atlanta for Mr. Chang, and there was competition amongst Beijing and Sydney, Australia to host the 2000 Olympics. The trip to Atlanta was because they had held the 1996 Olympics. For Mr. Chang to have a look around in Atlanta, there would need to be strings pulled. And by pulling these strings to enable him to visit Atlanta, this would demonstrate to the CCP that things were able to get done. There would also be instances in which Chang would force McDonald's out of their lease, so the Riyadis would have access to that prime location courtesy of Chang. With the Lipo Bank showing signs of financial distress, a rescue would be coordinated where Chinese resources would purchase shares of Lipo Group to create public confidence in the bank. And it should be noted that China Resource is an arm of China's military intelligence. While the authors of the book play up the coincidence that information gathering goes hand in hand with those involved in banking, as well as intelligence agents, making them perfect partners, I believe the choice to enter the US politics through banking was to mirror exactly what Saudi Arabia was doing. There is also the possibility that by setting up banking as a front to accommodate money laundering needs from drug trafficking, this was in their sights to have blackmail to ensure China's policy interests. With all the suspicious deaths in Arkansas that have links to CIA drug trafficking, I believe it would serve China's interest to have gathered evidence that supports a theoretical prosecution against all participants involved in any killings to clean up loose ends. Some information that is gathered is just more influential than other information that is collected. In 1988, Huang and Maria Hassai and the Riyadis would form the Pacific Leadership Group to attract Asian Americans into the Democratic Party. From there, they would organize trips to Asia for Democratic politicians such as Al Gore. And Al Gore would be chaperoned on tours to Asia, one of which was paid by the Sai Lai Buddhist Temple. In 1992, Huang would funnel money from a subsidiary of the Riyadis by the name of Hip Hing Holdings to a DNC Victory Fund. And 5 days after the money was received, he would request reimbursement from Jakarta, Indonesia. And the money would also flow from Riyadi associates and employees into the DNC. Between the time frame of March 15th of 1993 and July 18th of 1994, Huang would make 47 visits to the White House, making him an official friend of Bill's. As Huang became more involved in politics and fundraising, he would become known as a fixer of the Riyadi family and the main director of where money would be contributed and where the money would come from, since the Riyadis had so many subsidiaries. With his acting as intermediary and being seen as the gatekeeper for the flow of money, Huang would end up receiving a security clearance. By the end of January 1994, according to Ron Brown, John Huang was providing vital services in light of all his connections. Interestingly, he did not join the Commerce Department until July 18th of 1994, but yet he was in contact with top secret documents for 6 months prior to his hiring. For some strange reason, John Huang would still have access to classified material even after he left the Commerce Department, and he would reward the Democratic Party with donations in the 1996 election cycle as a thank you for all the classified material he was able to access since he retained his clearance. While all these fundraising contacts were made, the Clinton administration also sought to disable basic background check protocols for people who desired a security clearance. With this security clearance, John Huang would request files pertaining to Larry Wu-Tai Ching, who was charged with espionage. It should also be noted that John Huang would pressure Charles Meisner, who would in turn pressure Ron Brown to ensure John Huang would receive top clearance, acting as a consultant to the Commerce Department. With Charles Meisner and Ron Brown both dying in a plane crash, these key players would be taken out of the game permanently. While most reporters and other researchers prefer to put emphasis on how Bill Clinton is suspiciously linked to these well-timed deaths, I believe Bill Clinton, being in a position of power, sought to be the enabler-in-chief to the United States of America. In theory, it is more probable that the Chinese spy agencies ran a cleanup operation so their best asset could remain in place, and their best asset was Bill Clinton. When you consider that it is Lipo Bank throwing Webb Hubbell a lifeline in the form of financial compensation to buy his silence, it is not hard to believe that it might be the Chinese spy agency that silenced witnesses, and that it might not have been the Mossad as I once gave thought to. With Hillary Clinton being able to claim spousal privilege to keep Bill Clinton safe, she would be the intermediary to arrange the financial payoff from the Riyadis to Webb Hubbell. Some point to this payoff as being the buy-in to get John Huang into the commerce position where he would have top clearance, and there are many in the know close to Ron Brown who point to Hillary Clinton as being instrumental in making John Huang a made man. Ron Brown would also claim that the White House pressured him to advocate for the Lipo Beijing project, and while on the trip to promote the multi-billion-dollar development, it would also be a means of solicitation for campaign contributions to the DNC. With Huang being a made man in the Commerce Department in the eyes of the Riyadis and their paymasters, high-ranking officials in the department would attempt to downplay his role in policy matters pertaining to Indonesia and China, but he would play a key role in most of the decisions. To demonstrate who Huang was a servant to, it has been substantiated that 400 phone calls were made to various parts of the Lipo Empire, LiPo consultants, and at least 40 calls were made on LiPo corporate credit cards. All in all, 170 calls were made to Hong Kong, Indonesia, and China. Information Huang had access to consisted of CIA briefings, CIA materials shared by others, classified State Department cables relating to foreign economic and political matters, and all information that is confidential and not classified. As part of his job, he would see between 370 and 550 CIA-produced assessments of intelligence, and I'm guessing he would have had to photocopy everything and let someone else make sense of everything. The Thompson Committee has determined that there were 10 types of intel John Huang received, which would have benefited the LiPo Group, Stevens Inc., and the Chinese government. They consist of 1. Business opportunities in Vietnam, economic issues affecting Taiwan and China, 3. Investment opportunities in China, the North Korean food shortage, succession of power in China, China technology transfers, nuclear power in Asia, investments made in China, the Chinese auto industry, investment sentiment in Hong Kong, and Chinese influence over investments made into Taiwan and China. As it would turn out, Stevens would benefit from everything that China and the LiPo Group would benefit from, because Stevens had an office in Washington, D.C., which was the go-to place for Huang to send documents from. He would also receive documents there and made many calls from Stevens Inc., making them a partner in his crimes. On October 4th of 1994, Huang would receive his first briefing from the CIA, and later that day a fax was sent from Stevens Inc. to LiPo in Hong Kong. And this would set the stage for a pattern that can definitively be concluded. There would also be 2 other CIA briefings, which would be followed by faxes. In the year of 1995, Bill Clinton would need to be bankrolled for political advertising, so the Riyadis would come in very handy for the cash infusion. On September 13th, Bruce Lindsay would meet with James Riyadi to work out the details as for how money would flow in to support them. While they had their financial backer in place, there was some friction at the DNC, since the head of the DNC by the name of Fowler was resisting the influence of the Riyadi family. With Ickes running the Clinton campaign and Grohr, who was a partner at the LiPo Group, they were still trying to influence Fowler to make campaign contributions, but Bill Clinton would end up influencing Marvin Rose to hire Huang at DNC, where Huang would make his magic work and make money roll in. Meanwhile, all of the parties were planning their legal strategies for denying knowledge and intent. Starting in November of 1995, Huang would start to earn his MVP award by bringing in $30,000 in the month of November, followed by another $100,000 in December, February would be a great month in 1996 as the DNC would rake in 1 million. And through the months up to July, there would be a total of 1.53 million brought in. That can all be attributed to Huang's magic touch. On February 19th, Huang had contact with a Chinese agent by the name of Ted Soing, and he would be seated with the Clintons at a fundraiser. On April 8th, Huang would collect $250,000 from a Korean businessman by the name of John Lee. On April 29th, Ted Soing would have the pleasure of being positioned next to Al Gore, where a highlight temple fundraiser was taking place. There would also be two other occasions where Huang would sandwich Bill Clinton between James Riotti and Ted Soing, with Bill Clinton smiling for the cameras for photographic evidence to prove that he was delivering for China. Maria Tsai was ethnically Chinese but born in Taiwan and clearly devoted to the CCP. She would organize the Tsai Lai fundraiser, which Al Gore would be present. And Maria learned that in the 1980s that if you needed to skirt the law, it would pay dividends to be involved in politics with the Democratic Party. Being photographed with political players in California would also be a strategy to gain clientele from many ethnic Chinese people who had immigrated to the US but needed to become citizens. On April 22nd of 1988, Maria would cross paths with James Riotti and Huang at a Brentwood, California fundraising event, and James would make donations to the temple. With her being involved with ethnic Chinese people who were trying to become citizens and being a key player in the temple fundraising, she would get indicted for these scams using straw donors to funnel money to the DNC. And she would also manage to corrupt the Kennedys of Massachusetts by tarnishing their good names since they got caught taking illegal contributions. An individual by the name of Pauline Kachanalak, who also had connections to Maria and the temple fundraising, would also enter the mix. She would end up being a major contributor who had links to Ron Brown because she was ethnic Chinese. Because she was ethnic Chinese, she was allowed to migrate elsewhere to Thailand and start up a business while still being loyal to the CCP. And she would end up forming a group that would become known as the CP Group, which was involved in the wholesaling of chickens. As I researched this, I can't help but think of the bird flu and how Hillary Clinton once made a fortune off of commodity trading with the assistance of Purdue, the Purdue Chicken Empire. As for the CP Group, they would partner with Norinco, who was involved in Chinese arms trafficking. This wholesale chicken business would also partner with Chinese arms trafficking and would also make their pitch to the United States for having US technology exported to China, since all doors to trade were being opened. Nina Wang would also be a key player in funding pro-China agendas, where she would direct money to the Chinese PLA training program at Harvard. And she would also pay for shopping sprees of officers of the PLA, which is China's military arm. Aside from the minor oversights of receiving illegal campaign contributions from Red China, there would also be Chinese nationals entering the United States with large sums of cash, totaling $175,000, which was actually declared to customs. This individual was a member of a criminal syndicate, and his name is Ang Lepsang. He would arrive June 20th in 1994, and within 2 days he was dining at the White House with Mark Middleton. And he would also attend a presidential gala with his partner in crime, Charlie Tree, who had affiliations with the Triads, who of course worked closely with the PLA. Like any business enterprise, the Triads would earn their loyalty to the CCP by aiding PLA agents in their entry to Taiwan, which China considers theirs and not a free country. Somehow the Triads would become so integral in China that they have become the ones to train PLA agents in the infiltration of Taiwan. With the assistance of the United States government and their open door policy to immigration, the Triads would also have a home in Los Angeles, where they would specialize in drug trafficking, kidnapping, weapons smuggling, prostitution, home invasions, and money laundering, which is where banks such as Lipo Bank may have come in handy. As a result of Dan Burton's committee investigation, it would be established that Ang Lepsang had multiple financial connections to the Clinton-Gore campaign as follows. Ang wired Tree close to $1.5 million, and $645,000 would make its way to the DNC. Tree and Ang would organize a function for Ron Brown, which would morph into a DNC campaign solicitation event. Ang would attend a number of fundraising events and get positioned next to Bill Clinton. Chinese agents would also be the recipient of honors at a Clinton fundraiser in May of 1996. As a result of the Thompson Committee investigation, it would establish that Sang worked for the Chinese government, communicated frequently with the embassy and consulate, and traveled frequently to Beijing, giving briefings to CCP officials. It is also found that financial irregularities linked to the Soing family-owned hotel and PRC consulate located in Los Angeles also existed. Between the Soing family-owned hotel and the PRC consulate in Los Angeles, Soing arranged for an official from the Chinese Construction Bank to attend a Clinton fundraiser. This bank would receive a license to do business in the United States despite its weak financial strength. In 1996, China was launching missiles to demonstrate its strength and capabilities in the hopes of derailing Taiwan's democratic elections. While the missiles were being fired off, Charlie Tree, the gangster and member of the Triads, would deliver a handwritten message to Bill Clinton. Some would take the message as a threat to correspond to other political events that were occurring. As it would turn out, the PLA had missiles aimed at Los Angeles. And this was all because the Chinese didn't want interference from the US as they sought to provoke Taiwan. And in response to the letter, Bill Clinton's response was appeasement and a break from the long standing tradition of honoring Taiwan's independent sovereignty. When donations would surface from Charlie Tree, who has connections to Bill Clinton going back to Arkansas, Hillary would try to act as though she never heard of this Charlie Tree person. And it would act as though she had no idea who he was. Yet it would surface that Charlie Tree had placed a phone call to Hillary Clinton regarding her intended trip to Beijing, asking if he could accompany her to China to chaperone her. In March of 1997, the DNC would end up in a precarious position of having to return $37,500 to a foreigner who worked for a bank that was deemed to be controlled by the CCP, but also was in partnership with a branch of China's armed forces known as CONSTANT, or the Commission of Science Technology Institute for National Defense. Their function was split up into three parts, which consisted of gaining access to delivery systems and all forms of weapons. They also sought to traffic arms, and they also acted as one of China's intelligence arms. Having learned from a Chinese spy who was caught transferring night vision technology, the U.S. learned that the Chinese intel how the Chinese intel operations work. They wanted him to lie in wait for a long time, work his way towards meeting a U.S. congressman. He would report back on U.S. political and intelligence developments, find a way into the White House, and 5 was given directions to acquire technology pertaining to military technologies or radar technology. Other PRC intel agencies consist of the United Front Works Department, the CONSTANT, the PLA's liaison department, which is geared towards psychological warfare, China's Ministry of State Security, or the MSS, which operates through the education department of the Chinese embassy and consulate, and they served as the headquarters, which is where all illegal campaign donations originated from. With all the state-owned operations owned by China, that would serve as a non-official cover for these Chinese agencies. There are two cover companies that the Riady family interacted with, which were the Chinese Resources Group and the China Travel Service. One of the main functions of the China Travel Service is to coordinate propaganda and also operate a theme park in Florida, which is their main base of operations. As part of China's strategy to cause chaos and to give the United States more than one issue to deal with at a time, China sought to aid Muslim countries where the jihad movement was underway. Those countries were given weaponry technology, and they consist of Iran, Syria, Libya, North Korea, and Pakistan. While the Clinton administration looked the other way on China selling arms to these countries like Iran, they also sought to dismantle systems that provided oversight on imports and exports, like SOCOM. And by the end of March 1994, SOCOM would no longer exist. So without controls in place, an open door economic policy involving trade was in full swing between the US and China, allowing companies like Motorola and IBM to do business in China. There would also be a scientist by the name of William Perry, and in the 1970s, Perry would meet a PLA general by the name of Ding. In the time span of 1981 to 1992, Perry would make a number of trips to China. In 1993, Perry would become the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Right around this time frame, an individual by the name of Wilson Lewis would start a business to sell communications equipment to China, and his links to William Perry would come in very handy. Normally, a technology transfer or export would have been blocked, so Lewis sent a letter to Frank Wisner, who was awaiting confirmation to a Defense Department position that would have oversaw export controls. It would also take a national policy change to allow Lewis to export technology to China, and because the export controllers didn't know he was in partnership with a China state-controlled company, he was free to do as he pleased. In the case of McDonnell Douglas, such transfers to China would involve the technology for machinery, which was necessary to create, assemble military craft and missiles. In this case, there was a decrease in the American production of arms, and so McDonnell Douglas sold the facility to a company that had ties to the PLA. According to the Department of Defense Strategic Assessment, the transfer of the plant constituted 90 to 95% related defense production. 275 semi-trailers were used to ship equipment to the West Coast, and it would represent a whole transfer of manufacturing capabilities with regards to medical treatment, measurement, testing, evaluation, equipment, and machine tools with the means for transport. The transaction was coordinated as follows. CADIC, which stands for China Aero Technology Import-Export Corporation, bought the Columbus, Ohio plant from McDonnell Douglas, and in turn, CADIC would enter into a partnership to produce a short-range aircraft known as the Trunkliner. So if CADIC had to have an export license in order to buy the plant, how did they manage to get the license as part of the deal? Initially, there was resistance from the Defense Department, but Ron Brown and the Commerce Department would prevail since Perry did nothing to support the resistance in the Defense Department. The Clinton administration would enable China to enhance its supply chain logistics capabilities, since someone informed a member of the PLA that the U.S. Army's logistics systems resembled that of FedEx's. So China just needed to reverse engineer the FedEx logistics systems. Throughout the 1990s, China was setting its sights on dominating space, and to do that, they would have to excel in technologically in the fields of satellites. In September of 1994, there was an ONI report acknowledging that China was already using existing remote sensing data from commercial satellites and sought to exploit the data for military purposes. And they were also predicting that by the year 2000, China would also have its own satellite program. They were also setting their sights on more futuristic weapons like beam, plasma, and microwave weaponry. Because the launch capabilities for getting satellites into orbit are very similar to launch methods for ballistic missiles, they shared these commonalities. The propulsion system was the same, the structure was the same with respect to materials, design and fabrication. The structure was the same with respect to materials, design and fabrication. Staging, guidance, and control were also interchangeable. The ground support and launch equipment were interchangeable. The payload deployment were the same, and the development, testing, and engineering facilities were the same as well. By enabling China to launch US satellites, they were able to perfect the reliability of their space launch capabilities. As for satellites, commercial satellites work just the same as military use satellites. At the time, there was a need for an export license if you were to transfer any technology. If any commercial satellite technology was to be transferred and used by China, soon satellites would be sold to the Asia Pacific Telecommunications Company, based out of Hong Kong, but owned and operated by ethnic Chinese with ties to the PLA. As the United States became more dependent on China for space launches, there was a need for China's launch capabilities to become more reliable in the interest of saving money. So the reliability of launches by China was improved, and by outsourcing this strategy, they were able to reverse engineer the US technologies. As a result of congressional pressure, the State Department would have to release documents that supported the fact that the State Department and engineers from Loral and Hughes helped the Chinese make their rockets more reliable and recommended how to make improvements. As the Justice Department was closing in on Loral and Hughes, Bill Clinton would approve a waiver allowing the technology transfer to China, which essentially squashed the Justice Department's investigation. In turning your attention towards the element of motive, it would be discovered that the chairman of Loral, Bernard Schwartz, and his family and employees would donate a significant amount of money to the Clinton-Gore cause. Having donated to Democratic politicians in the amount of $100,000, Schwartz would end up on Ron Brown's trade delegation to China, and Brown would set up meetings between Schwartz and CCP officials. When it came to Hughes, they would end up providing the CCP with the infrastructure for mobile telecommunications, and such commercial communications also had military applications for the CCP to benefit. There would also be instances in which Lockheed Martin would enable the pass-through of downlinks for missile launching sites in China. This was done by Lockheed Martin transferring the technology to the China Orient Satellite Telecommunications, which was a joint venture between the Chinese Ministry of Posts and Telecommunications and Poly Technologies, which was run by Deng Xiaoping's son-in-law. Poly Technologies also just happened to be an arms trafficker which supplied arms to LA gangs. Daimler-Benz Aerospace would also have the opportunity to aid China in their satellite launching capabilities, with Daimler-Benz having bought Messerschmitt, Volkow, and Bohm, a German firm which was developing a long-range missile named the Condor II for Iraq and other countries such as China. MBB Daimler had been collaborating with Constant to develop the PLA's communication satellites. Much of the appeasement policies that aided China can be traced to Sandy Berger, who met Bill and Hillary Clinton while working on the McGovern campaign. Up until his political appointment in the Clinton administration, Berger was the point person at the Hogan and Hartson law firm, which acted as a representative to the trade office of the Chinese government. Example of Berger's pro-China position can be demonstrated by his influence in repealing the export controls over satellites to China. It was also Berger who strongly recommended that Bill Clinton grant a waiver allowing the Justice Department case against Loral to be squashed. He would also deny any knowledge that China was selling missiles to Iran, and these companies that sold the missiles to Iran had never been sanctioned. Another influence that would facilitate a shift in policies that were favorable to China can be traced to Johnny Chung, who sought to act as an intermediary for donations to the Clinton family, originating from the Chinese government. Chung would end up having to cooperate with the Justice Department and acknowledge that he had received money from Lieutenant Colonel Liu Chiang, who was the daughter of General Liu, who was a high-up official in the PLA. With China focusing its efforts on creating strength through its missile program and its navy, China was also selling arms to either dictators or terrorists. Such examples of arms sales consist of shipments to the Burmese military regime and Pakistan to essentially cause destabilization. A third example of arms shipments to cause destabilization is the shipment of automatic weapons that was headed to the Oakland, California port, but it would be intercepted by the US Customs. Rather than confronting the intent of COSCO, Sandy Berger, Navy Secretary Dalton, combined would reject the idea that any threats even existed, and Dalton would stonewall Congress on the issue of COSCO, representing a threat to the United States, and would state in writing that I do not believe that the China Shipping Company poses a tactical or strategic threat to the United States Navy. Perhaps Dalton really didn't believe that China would disguise its military intent with merchant ships. By China using cargo ships for military purposes, the US Navy was not allowed to consider such cargo ships as targets. Somehow COSCO would manage to gain control over a Long Beach, California port with the assistance of the Clinton White House. With the Navy port having been shut down in 1991, there was hopes that the Marines would occupy that space, but China would manage to outbid the US Marines. For whatever reason, the city of Long Beach decided that the best use of the space would be to have COSCO occupying that strategic port and not the Marines. Berger would defend the COSCO occupation, stating that there was sound reason to allow Chinese businesses to do business in the US, and he would seem to forget that China used many business conglomerates to advance China's national interest. In a CFIUS report, they would claim that COSCO posed no threat with regards to espionage, nor did it pose a threat with regards to migrant or drug smuggling. They seemingly intentionally overlooked the fact that US Customs had intercepted shipments to California that were intended to be delivered to gangs. In Berger's claims, they were not engaged in illegal activities. He would also fail to realize that illegal campaign contributions were a federal crime. There would also be no donations made to the DNC because Chong wanted to ensure that PRC officials had access to meetings with Bill Clinton and a meeting with Al Gore. He also wanted a lunch at the White House and a meeting with Commerce official Ron Brown. When his 4 requests were not met by Dan Fowler, he would solicit Hillary Clinton, and she would make all his requests happen, including a tour of the White House, a photo op with Hillary Clinton herself, and an invitation to attend the president's radio address with his delegation. All of these requests were to showcase the China infiltration and would occur after Johnny Chong wrote a $50,000 check to the DNC. While China was doing everything they could to undermine the US, Bill Clinton and Al Gore were making arrangements for a high-ranking military officer from China to meet with SEC officials. As part of their embracing capitalism, China would spin off their state-owned companies to individual investors in the US, and these companies would become known as red chips. Senator John Kerry would also take donations from Johnny Chong in a quid pro quo exchange for arranging a meeting with SEC officials and high-ranking Chinese officials. But this meeting would be dressed up as a tour. One of the individuals taking part in this tour was Lieutenant Colonel Liu. By having access to the US capital markets, Chinese companies with loyalties to the CCP would be able to use Americans' money to wage economic warfare against the US. When you look at what China has sought to do, you can make the conclusion that they are very mindful of what the CIA is up to with Saudi intelligence. What we do know is that Richard Pearl's vision for the New American Century Plan would consist of taking down many Middle Eastern countries that were devout to their Muslim faith. We also know that the constant intervention of the US stirred up feelings for jihad, and the Muslim Brotherhood decided to seek refuge in multiple countries since they were disavowed by Saudi Arabia. If you were to assume that China and Bill Clinton were aware of the hopes to implement the New American Century Plan, You could begin to see how China sought to mirror those policy intents by selling arms and technologies to countries like Libya, Iran, Syria, Egypt, and others. You could, in theory, conclude that if it were not for Bill Clinton getting so cozy with the CCP, just giving away technologies that China may never have, armed countries that were targets of the new American Century Plan. There is also the fact that John Brennan was the CIA station chief in Saudi Arabia, is a convert to Islam, and has also made statements showing his devotion to the CCP. If he is devoted to the CCP and is the CCP's goal to cause so much turmoil in the US, giving us too many things to deal with at once, you would have to ask yourself the question of why you think he and his supporters should be considered the arbiters of facts and the perception of reality, knowing that his goals are likely to be aligned with the CCP. Knowing that it's the goal of the CCP to cause domestic chaos, which is evidenced in their shipments of arms to LA gangs. And this kind of chaos can still be going on as of now. We just don't know how as of yet. So thank you for listening. And that's it for this podcast.